The county assessor's card for the Meadowlark Cafe listed the value of the improvements at $0. Not low, zero. A cinder block and aluminum diner on 4/10 of an acre of Nebraska sandhill grass, a gravel lot going back to weeds, a rooftop neon bird that hadn't been fixed since Reagan, and the land itself worth $470, which is roughly what the county thought the dirt would bring if you sold it by the yard. It was the only asset in the entire divorce that her husband's attorney let go, without a single mark of his pen. He crossed it off the schedule himself, the way you'd wave a fly off a plate. So at 46 years old, with $1,286 in a checking account, a 19-year-old Ford Ranger with 214,000 miles on the odometer, and no address of her own anywhere in the state of Nebraska, Marlene Odell drove 4.5 hours west on a dead highway to sell a cafe she hadn't set foot in since she was a girl. She planned to be back on the interstate by Sunday. Instead, on her first night, cold and half out of her mind with exhaustion, she found the breaker panel behind the pie case and flipped the switch that said sign because it was the only switch labeled in handwriting. The old transformer coughed, and out on the roof, a neon meadowlark that had been dark for 16 months came up, red and gold, over an empty parkling, and Marlene stood in the gravel with her arms crossed. And no idea in the world that she had just repeated something her grandmother had done every single night for 58 years. 4 days later, she pried up a warped board behind the counter, and what was in the crawl space under that floor would change how an entire Nebraska town remembered a woman most of them had only ever known as the one who poured the coffee. Before we get into it, do me a favor. Hit subscribe and tap that like button, because what Marlene found under that floor is the kind of thing that follows you around for a couple of days after you hear it. And tell us in the comments where you're watching from tonight. We read every one of them, and it's something else to see how far these stories travel. Now let's begin. The conference room in Lincoln smelled like carpet glue and burnt coffee, the particular smell of rooms where people sign away 21 years in under 10 minutes. Marlene sat with her purse in her lap. Curtis wasn't there. He'd sent his attorney, a polite young man with a good watch, who spread the papers out and turned them toward her one at a time like a card dealer. He wanted me to say he's sorry he couldn't make it, the young man said. That's all right, Marlene said. It wasn't, but she'd been saying that particular sentence for so long it came out of her before anything truer could. The agreement was short because the prenuptial agreement had already done most of the work, 21 years earlier, at Curtis's parents' kitchen table in Grand Island. She'd been 24. His mother had made a pot roast. His father had slid the document across the vinyl tablecloth and said it was just a formality, that everybody in business did it, and Marlene, who had grown up in a rented duplex and did not know a single person in business, had signed it with a pen that had a feed store's name on the side. The house was in the LLC. The rental duplexes were in the LLC. The 2 trucks and the boat and the retirement account were in the LLC. And the LLC was Curtis's, and Curtis, on paper, had brought all of it in and built all of it, while Marlene had worked 19 years of night shifts in the emergency department at St. Xavier's and put every dollar of it into the joint account she no longer had access to. She could have fought it. A lawyer had told her gently that she might win something in 2 years and $80,000 in fees she didn't have. She signed. She wanted out more than she wanted even. The attorney tapped the last line. There's a property in Sheridan County. A cafe? Mr. Lamb's position is that it's a liability and the taxes are your business now. He almost smiled. The county has the building assessed at nothing. That was the kindest sentence anyone said to her all day, and it wasn't meant kindly. She carried her things out in a banker's box, a chipped Pyrex bowl, her nursing school pin, a photograph of a heavy-set woman in a hairnet standing under a neon bird, squinting into the sun, one hand up like she was waving somebody off. 21 years, and it went in the bed of the Ranger with room left over. Marlene had been laid off from St. Xavier's 14 weeks before the divorce was final. Not fired. Restructured. The night department consolidated, and the nurses with the most years on the clock cost the most per hour, and the letter had used the word unfortunately 3 times. She had triaged people on the worst nights of their lives for 19 years, and she had a laminated badge in a drawer and a body that woke up at 6:40 p.m. no matter what she did. She drove west. The interstate ran out of her interest around North Platte, and she got off and picked up the old highway. The 2-lane, the one that used to be the road before the road moved. It ran through Brule and Big Springs and a dozen towns that had been built facing it the way sunflowers face south, and now sat with their backs turned, grain elevators, boarded storefronts, a Methodist church with a marquee missing half its letters. Then, 40 miles from anywhere, a rise, a curve, and Cordell. There was a feed store, a bank, a bar, a post office inside the bar, and at the far end of town where the highway straightened out again, a low aluminum building with rounded corners and a rooftop sign shaped like a bird with its beak open, and underneath the bird, in tubes gone dull and gray, the word eat. Marlene pulled into the gravel and shut off the truck and sat there while the engine ticked. The Meadowlark Cafe, her grandmother's whole life, and the county said it was worth nothing. And looking at it, Marlene couldn't argue. Weeds through the gravel. A cracked pane in the door patched with a square of cardboard and duct tape. The bird's tail was missing 2 tubes. She had been 6 years old the last time she came here. She could remember the counter stools being red and the way the pie case fogged when the door opened in winter. She hadn't come for the funeral. She'd meant to. Curtis had said the drive was 8 hours round trip, and he had a closing that Tuesday. And she had said all right, and she had sat in a Grand Island parking lot on the day they buried Iva Odell, and cried in a car with the engine running. And then she had gone home and made dinner. The key from the manila envelope stuck, then turned. The smell came out to meet her, fryer oil and Comet and pine cleaner and, under everything, coffee. 16 months cold, and the place still smelled like coffee. 9 stools at the counter, red vinyl split on 3 of them, 6 booths along the window. A pie case empty, a cast iron flat-top griddle, a hand-lettered sign taped to the register that said, "We don't depate anything," and on a nail behind the door hung an apron, faded from red to something like clay, the pocket worn through at one corner from a lifetime of order pads going in and out. Marlene crossed the floor and put her face in it before she decided to, and it still smelled like her grandmother. Grease and lily of the valley and cigarette smoke from a habit Iva quit in 1979. She stood there a long time. She didn't cry. She'd done her crying in a parking lot 16 months earlier, and that well had been dry a while. It was full dark by the time she thought about a motel and realized there wasn't one for 31 miles, and that she had a sleeping bag behind the seat, out of an old habit from a life where she'd slept in her car between shifts. She built a nest of it in the corner booth. She found a percolator and a can of coffee that had gone to dust and made a cup anyway. Then she went looking for the light switch and found the panel behind the pie case, and every breaker in it was labeled in a small square handwriting that leaned uphill. Griddle, case, boot, sign. She flipped sign because she wanted to see it. The transformer on the roof made a sound like a big insect clearing its throat, and then the parking lot outside the window went red and gold. And Marlene Odell stood in the middle of a dead cafe at the end of a dead highway and watched a neon bird come back to life, over 4/10 of an acre that the county said was worth $470. She left it on. She told herself she was too tired to get up and flip it off. If you've made it this far, hit subscribe, because the reason that sign was wired to its own breaker is the reason none of what comes next could have gone any other way. She woke up at 4:50 in the morning to the sound of someone moving in the parking lot. Marlene lay in the booth with her heart going and listened. Footsteps on gravel, deliberate, a scrape. Then the unmistakable sound of something heavy being set down on the concrete step outside the door, and the footsteps going away again. She got up, took the tire iron from behind the seat of her truck, out of an instinct she did not examine, and looked out the window through the crack in the blinds. There was a boy standing at the edge of the lot where the gravel met the grass. Tall, thin, the way a kid is thin when he's still deciding how tall he's going to be. Maybe 17. Canvas coat 2 sizes too big, hood up, hands jammed in the pockets. He was looking at the roof. He was looking at the sign, and his face had gone completely still, the way a face goes when something you'd made peace with turns out not to be finished. Behind him, parked at the back of the lot in the weeds where she hadn't noticed it in the dark, sat a Peterbilt with no trailer, an old one, faded blue, Nebraska plates 4 years expired. Marlene opened the door with the tire iron hanging forgotten from her hand. "Who are you?" "I sweep the lot," the boy said. Like that settled it. He nodded at the step. There was a 5-gallon bucket there, full of gravel he'd raked back from the edge of the road. "And I fixed the transformer in March. It was arcing. Whole roof could have gone up." "Why would you fix the sign on an empty diner?" "Because it's not supposed to go dark," he said. He said it plain, not stubborn, the way you'd tell somebody the highway ran east and west. "Iva said keep it lit," the boy said. His jaw worked once. Nobody ever told me she'd want me to quit. His name was Emmett Shaw, and it took the better part of a week to get that much out of him. That first morning he wouldn't come inside. He stood on the step with his hood down, answering her in single syllables, his eyes tracking the road and the truck and the door in a rotation she recognized. She'd seen it 100 times in triage bays at 3 in the morning. It's what a person does when they've learned that the fastest way out of a room is the most important thing about it. So she stopped asking questions and made coffee, and carried 2 cups out, and sat down on the cold step next to him, and looked at the same stretch of empty highway he was looking at, and said nothing at all, which turned out to be the only way Emmett Shaw knew how to be near another human being. "You knew my grandmother," she said eventually. "She fed me. How long?" 2 years. He turned the cup around in his hands, both hands, holding it careful like it could be taken back. "My dad drove that truck, long haul. He died in it, other side of Rollins. Heart. They found him in the sleeper at a scale house. He set it flat, no feeling let anywhere near it. I was 15. There wasn't anybody. County wanted to put me in alliance. Iva said I could park it out back and eat here, and I could sleep in the sleeper if I wanted, and she never once asked me a single question about any of it." He drank his coffee. "That's all," he said. Marlene looked at the truck in the weeds and did the arithmetic she'd been doing since Lincoln. Get somebody to haul the griddle. Scrap the sign. List the lot with a realtor in alliance. Take whatever 4/10 of an acre brings, and put this whole business behind her. Then she looked at the boy on the step, and the arithmetic sat down and stopped talking. "Stay with me here, because the next thing Marlene did, almost without deciding to, is the moment this whole story turns. She didn't call the realtor. She got the fryer cleaned out instead. She scrubbed the flat top with a pumice stone until her shoulders burned, and the iron came up black and slick and honest. She pulled the cardboard off the door and reglazed the pane with putty. She found Gone Hard in a can under the sink, working it soft in her hands until it took, and she cut her thumb doing it and didn't stop. Curtis had spent 21 years making her a woman who checked with a man before she did things. Out here there was no one to check with. There was only the next thing, and the astonishment. It kept ambushing her, out of nowhere, in the middle of a task, finding out she could just do it. Emmett worked alongside her more each day, though never quite with her. Always at an angle, always with an exit. He was good with his hands, better than she was. He knew the building the way a body knows a house it slept next to. "Don't step on that one," he said. The first time she crossed behind the counter and a board barked under her heel. The loose one. Eva never fixed it. Said it told her when somebody came in the back. And the cafe kept telling her things she didn't yet have the words for. There were 3 coffee mugs on the shelf, by the register that didn't match the others, kept separate, kept clean. There were hooks screwed into the wall of the back hallway at 4 different heights, and she couldn't figure out what a person hangs, at 4 different heights, until she watched Emmett hang his coat. On the lowest one, out of habit, without looking. There was a folded army cot behind the water heater. There was a case of canned peaches under the prep table with a receipt still taped to it from 2009. And there was that switch, wired all by itself, labeled in Eva's uphill hand, running to a rooftop sign on a building that closed at 2 in the afternoon. On the 9th evening, a clear one, with the cold coming down hard, and the stars starting to crowd up the way. They only do where there's nothing on the ground to compete with them. Emmett did something he'd never done. He came around to the front step where she was sitting with her coffee gone cold. "You ever been on the roof?" "No. There's a ladder off the back of the walk-in." She followed him up. The roof was tar and gravel, and the wind came across it out of Wyoming, with nothing between here and there to slow it down. And they stood beside the sign, close enough that the tubes threw red on their hands and their faces and made everything look like a photograph from a long time ago. And below them the highway ran out flat into the dark in both directions. 40 miles of nothing east, 31 miles of nothing west. And the neon bird burning over all of it, the only made light in 100 square miles. She never turned it off, Emmett said. Not once. Not in a blizzard. Not when the power came back after the ice storm and she went up on this roof herself at 84 years old to reset the breaker. Cafe closed at 2. Sign burned till dawn. Did you ever ask her why? Emmett was quiet a while, getting it right. I said it was a waste of money, is what I said. $60 a month, easy, for a sign on a closed diner. He put his hands in his pockets. She said a light you only switch on when you see somebody coming isn't a light. It's a spotlight, and she wasn't in the spotlight business. He watched the road. She said you leave it burning for all the years nobody pulls in. That way it's already on the night somebody does. Marlene didn't say anything. She didn't trust her voice. She stood on a tar roof in the wind next to a boy in a dead man's coat, under her grandmother's bird. And she thought about how many nights she had driven home from a shift at St. Xavier's on the interstate, with her hands at 10 and 2, and no light anywhere she was going toward. They climbed down without talking. That night, for the first time, Emmett didn't go back out to the sleeper of the Peterbilt. He unfolded the army cot in the back hallway, under the 4 hooks, and slept in the building. It was a small thing. It was the largest thing Marlene had seen in a year. If you're still with me, this is where it stops being a story about a diner and becomes a story about what was hidden inside one. Subscribe right now, because what Marlene pulled out from under that floor is the reason a whole town is going to show up in this story later on. And none of it can be undone. It was the loose board that gave it away. She meant to fix it. That was all. She got a pry bar and a fistful of ring-shank nails and knelt down behind the counter on a Tuesday morning in November, and she worked the bar under the edge of the board, and it came up too easy. Because it wasn't nailed. It was cut clean and square, both ends to lift. Underneath, between the joists, was a cavity lined with cedar shingles to keep the damp out. About the size of a coffin for a large dog, and the cold air that came out of it smelled like paper and old metal and something else. Something like a room where someone has just stopped talking. Inside were 3 ledgers, cloth-bound fat, the corners rounded soft, a King Edward cigar box, and a 5-pound coffee tin with a strip of friction tape around the lid, and it was heavier than any coffee ever weighed. Marlene lifted the top ledger out with both hands. The cover fell open on a page filled with small square handwriting that leaned uphill, and the date at the top was March 3rd, 1962. She read 4 lines, and then she sat down on the floor because her legs quit on her. If you followed Marlene this far, take 1 second and subscribe, because what was written in those books is the thing that turns 4/10 of an acre in Nebraska into something nobody in Sheridan County is ever going to forget. March 3rd, 1962. Man came in at 11:40 at night, walked from where his car quit at the section line, wouldn't say his name, ate 2 eggs and a stack and cried into the second cup. Something about a brother in Korea. Wrote him a ticket so he'd have something in his hand and didn't ring it. Told him the sign's on all night. He won't come back. It's on anyway. Marlene turned the page. Then she turned another one. Names, dates, reasons. A woman with 2 kids and a bruise she wouldn't talk about, given the booth and the cot and a bus ticket to a sister in Ogallala. A soybean farmer in the fall of '78, who sat at the counter for 4 hours and left his shotgun in Eva's trunk for 2 weeks, at her suggestion, and came back for it in December and never mentioned it again. A runaway from Chadron 17, fed and warmed and driven by Eva herself to the one deputy in the county she trusted to be gentle about it. Page after page after page, 61 years of them, and at the bottom of nearly every entry in one form or another the same 2 lines. Sign still on. Coffee still hot. She read them out loud after a while to the empty room, because it felt wrong to let words that quiet go a second time into silence. Emmett came in from the lot and stood in the doorway with his coat still on and listened. And when she got to one that had no name at all, only a date in 1991, and the words she didn't want anybody to know she'd been here, so I never wrote it down until now, the boy turned around and walked back out into the parking lot. And Marlene let him go and did not follow. She understood now what the cafe had been trying to tell her for 2 weeks. The 3 mugs that didn't match, kept clean, kept separate, for the people who came at night when there was no one to serve them. The 4 hooks at 4 heights. The cot. The case of peaches. The sign wired to its own breaker so that no closing time habit, no exhaustion, no accident of routine could ever put it out. For 61 years, Iva Odell had kept a light burning at the end of a highway that the world had stopped using, so that anybody driving away from the worst night of their life would have one thing in the dark to steer toward. She had fed them. She had listened to the things they couldn't say to anybody who knew them. She had written every one of them down, not as a debt, but as a life. And she had never said a word about it to a single soul, including her own son, including her own granddaughter, who had eaten pie at that counter at 6 years old, 15 feet, from a trapdoor she never knew was there. The cigar box held $183 in soft old bills, a spare key to nothing, and a small flat key with a number stamped on it. Then Marlene peeled the tape off the coffee tin. It was full of order tickets, the green kind, From a spike, the kind a waitress tears off and hands to the cook. 340 of them. She counted twice because the number mattered to her in a way she couldn't have explained to anybody. Everyone was written out in full. 2 eggs over, hash, wheat toast, coffee, grilled cheese, tomato soup, milk. Chicken fried steak, no gravy. He says his stomach's bad. Everyone was priced, everyone was totaled, and not one of them had ever been rung into the register. Instead of a payment at the bottom of each ticket in that uphill hand, there was a reason. Laid off at the packing plant. 3 kids. Left her husband, going to Denver, has $40. Wife passed in August. He doesn't cook. Kid's been sleeping in his car in the church lot. Don't say anything to him. Marlene sat on the floor behind the counter, with the tin in her lap, and went through them one at a time, and the cafe got dark around her, and she didn't get up to turn on the lights. Ticket 214 was dated September 1997. Farrell Dunbar, 2 hamburger steaks, 4 milks, 6 coffees, running total across 6 weeks. At the bottom, took the kids' shoe money to the vet for the dog. Won't tell Alma, never mention it. Ticket 88 was dated November 1971. Odessa, 19, pregnant, no ring, no ride. Booth 6 for a month. Tell her the pie's on the house so she'll eat it. And ticket 302 was dated the 7th of April 1984. Frances Odell. Coffee. Grilled cheese, cut in triangles for the little one. Marlene stopped breathing. Her mother's name, on a ticket, in her grandmother's hand. She'd have been 6. April of 1984. She had a memory, one she'd never been able to place, of red counter stools and a fogged pie case, and the sound of her mother crying quietly in a booth while Marlene ate a grilled cheese cut into triangles, and of being carried out to a car at some hour that had no business having a child awake in it. She had asked her mother about it once, in the nursing home near the end. Her mother had said she didn't remember. At the bottom of ticket 302 under the total, Iva had written, "My son's wife. Left him tonight, came back to him Thursday, and I won't say a word about either one. Girl's asleep in booth 6. She looks like Ellis. Signs on, coffee's hot. She can come back." Marlene put the ticket down on the floor and put both hands over her mouth. She sat with it a long while. Then, because she couldn't stop, she went back to the last ledger, the newest one, and turned to the final written page. And the date was 14 months before Iva died. Marlene called for my birthday. That husband of hers talks even when he isn't in the room. You can hear him in the places she used to keep herself. She says everything's fine in that voice she's used since she was 6 years old, the one she uses when it isn't. I didn't push. Never could push her. She's got Frances's spine, goes quiet and sets up like concrete. I'd like her to come out. Sit in booth 6. Remember, she was somebody before she was somebody's wife. She won't. Maybe never. I keep the sign on for everybody's grandchild. I keep it on for mine too, just in case. Coffee's still hot, Marlene. It always was. The well she'd thought had gone dry 16 months ago in a Grand Island parking lot turned out to have only been waiting for the right reason. She was not going to sell this place. She'd known it for a week. Now she knew why. She went into Cordell on a Thursday for a fan belt, and that was how Sheridan County found out that Iva Odell's granddaughter had come home. The woman behind the counter at Dunbar Feed and Hardware looked at her over the register for a long 3 seconds and said in a voice that carried to the back of the store, "You're Iva's." The store turned around, and what happened next was something Marlene had no room for, because for 21 years she had been a woman that people were polite to. And these people were not polite. They were something older than polite. Farrell Dunbar himself came out from behind the parts counter, 70-some, hands like tree bark, and took her hand in both of his and didn't say anything for a moment. 1997 was a bad year, he said. Your grandmother fed my whole family for 6 weeks and wrote it on tickets she never rang up. I found out 10 years later when I tried to settle up and she pretended she couldn't recall it. She never told me, Marlene said. She never told anybody. He let go of her hand. That's how you knew it was real. A woman named Alma, small and iron-haired, sat down on a stack of salt blocks and didn't say much, because some debts are too big for the mouth. A deputy named Whitcomb leaned on the end of the aisle with his hat in his hands, and said that more than once over the years, dispatch had gotten a call out of the Meadowlark at some ungodly hour. And it was Eva's voice, flat and calm as a stone. I've got somebody here needs a ride and a friendly face. Come slow and come by yourself. When Iva Odell asked you to come slow and come alone, Whitcomb said, turning the hat, you understood a life was getting handed across a counter. I drove that road in every kind of weather, never once minded. They wouldn't take her money for the fan belt. She was learning that out here, refusing a kindness, was its own kind of unkindness, that the whole county ran on a quiet economy of debts nobody collected and gifts nobody announced, and that her grandmother had been its banker for 61 years without once sending a statement. If you've come this far with Marlene, take a second and subscribe and tell me in the comments, because the next man to pull into that gravel lot wasn't hungry, and he wasn't lost. He came to take the whole thing. The pickup came up the old highway 11 days later. Marlene heard it before she saw it, a big new engine with a deep expensive note to it, and then a silver crew cab swung into the gravel and parked square in front of the door, nose in, like a man planting a flag. The man who got out did not belong in that parking lot and knew it and did not care. 55, maybe. Quilted vest, good boots that had never been muddy. The easy smile of a person who has already decided how a conversation ends. Garrett Voss, he said. Meridian Travel Centers. You'd be the granddaughter, Marlene Odell. She didn't take the hand. He let it drop without a flicker and turned a slow circle, taking in the lot, the highway, the flat brown miles running out to the horizon. Your grandmother turned me down 3 times in 6 years, never once gave me a reason a businessman could follow. He smiled smaller. I was sorry to hear she passed. I'd hate for her stubbornness to cost you what it cost her. Marlene said nothing, which was a thing she was learning out here. That silence is a tool, and most men cannot stand to leave it lying on the table. Voss couldn't. Let me be plain. The state's rebuilding the interchange 9 miles east. 240 trucks a day come off it, and there's not a shower, a scale, or a hot meal for 31 miles in either direction. He nodded at the highway. This lot is the only frontage on the only surviving right-of-way that hooks to that interchange. I've got 60 acres behind you under contract. I've got a 180-space travel center drawn up, fuel islands, a franchise pad, and every single sheet of it depends on where you and I are standing. He named a number. 6,500. He watched her face the way a man watches a card table. When it didn't move, he named another. $55,000. For a condemned cafe and 4/10 of an acre of sand. He shrugged, generous. I understand you're between things right now. Between things. That was Curtis's phrase, the gentle little knife of it. The way he'd always made her smallness sound like concern for her, which meant Curtis had talked to this man, or somebody who knew Curtis had. Marlene felt the old reflex come up her spine, the 21-year habit of softening, agreeing, making the man comfortable so the moment would end sooner. And then she felt the tin behind her, on the shelf under the register, with 340 tickets in it, and one that said girls asleep in booth 6. The reflex died standing up. It's not for sale, she said. It wasn't for sale when she was alive. Keep your drawings. Stay right here, because this is exactly where Garrett Voss stopped smiling, and where he made the mistake that cost him the whole thing. Subscribe now, because something Eva O did in 1974, quietly telling nobody, is about to reach 50 years forward and put its hand on this man's chest. Voss studied her a moment, and something went flat behind his eyes. That's a shame, he said, and the warmth went out of his voice like heat out of a stovepipe. Here's what your grandmother never had to deal with. That building has no current occupancy permit. That grease hood hasn't been certified since the Clinton administration. The septic is a lagoon that predates the DEQ, and I've got a surveyor who tells me there's a real question about whether your access easement to the highway shoulder is even recorded. He set a card on the step, since she wouldn't take it from his hand. My attorneys can spend 2 years and more money than you will ever see, turning that building into a problem you cannot afford. Or you can take $55,000 and a clean walk. People in your position always come around, once they do the arithmetic. He got back in the truck. They always do the arithmetic, he said through the window, and backed out onto the highway and was gone. And the gravel he threw was the loudest thing that had happened in that lot in a decade. Marlene stood there a long time. Emmett had come up beside her at some point, silent as weather. That's the truck stop man, he said. He sent a surveyor out twice while Iva was alive. She ran him off with a griddle scraper. I don't have a lawyer, Marlene said. I don't have $55,000. I don't have 2 years, and I don't have one single person. She picked the card up off the step. So I honest to God don't know. She didn't sleep. She lay on the cot in the back hallway and listened to the wind hit the aluminum and thought about the people in those ledgers who had faced worse than this with a good deal less. And at some point before dawn she got up and went out and stood in the gravel and looked at the bird burning red and gold over an empty highway, and she decided that whatever else came, the sign was staying on. The answer came up that highway the next afternoon, the way the answer had always come up that highway, in the form of somebody Iva had once fed. A 20-year-old Buick pulled in slow and parked at a respectful distance, and a woman got out. 70s, tall, straight-backed, a wool coat, reading glasses on a chain, and a leather portfolio under one arm that had the soft, worn look of a thing carried into a great many serious rooms. She looked at the cafe and the sign for a while, the way you look at a place you have heard about your entire life. Then she came to the step. "You'd be Marlene," she said. "Odessa Krause. I was the Register of Deeds in this county for 31 years, till they made me retire." She looked up at the roof, and something moved across her face and went away again. "I came out because Whitcomb told me Iva's granddaughter was here. And because a man in a silver pickup has been at my old office 3 separate times this fall pulling your chain of title. Those 2 facts together got me out of a warm chair I had planned to die in." She looked at Marlene over the glasses. "May I sit down?" Marlene made coffee, and they sat in booth 6, and Odessa put her hand flat on the tabletop the way you'd touch a horse you'd once ridden. "I sat in this booth for a month in 1971, she said. "I was 19 and I was pregnant, and my father had put my things on the porch. Eva told everybody the pie was on the house that year so I'd eat it and not know why." She took her glasses off and folded them and held them in both hands. "My son is 54. He's a pharmacist in Scottsbluff. He has 3 children. She put the glasses back on, and her voice came back down to level. "So when I tell you I intend to handle the man in the silver pickup, Miss Odell, I would like you to understand that I have been waiting 54 years for the chance, and you would be doing me a kindness to let me." Marlene showed her everything. She lifted the board. She brought out the 3 ledgers, the cigar box, the tin. Odessa went very quiet. She read 4 tickets and stopped and took her glasses off again and pressed the heel of her hand against her eye. Then she got businesslike, because business was how Odessa Krause held herself together. She went through Voss's threats one at a time and took the air out of everyone. The hood, the permit, the lagoon. Nobody had cited a thing. No county in Nebraska condemns a building because a man in a vest wants the frontage, and the word inspection is only frightening to people who can't afford to call a bluff. "So let's make sure you can," she said. "We'll have the hood certified this week and the septic tested, and both of them on file at the courthouse. Bluffs die on paper." Then she leaned in and her voice changed. "Now, did your grandmother ever do anything unusual with this land? Sign anything? Talk about a covenant, a trust, a restriction? Think." Marlene started to say no. Then she stopped, because the small flat key in the cigar box had been bothering her for 2 weeks, a key that fit nothing in the building. And she remembered, all at once and whole, being 6 years old in a booth with a coloring book, and a man in a tie sitting across from her grandmother with papers, and Eva signing something and sliding it back and saying, in a voice Marlene had filed away and forgotten for 40 years, "Then that's the end of it. And nobody can change it after I'm gone." Odessa Krause set down her cup very carefully. "What year?" 1974, or close." Odessa stood up. "Get your coat. Hold on right here, because what those 2 women pulled out of the deed books in that courthouse basement is the entire turn of this story. Subscribe and stay with me, because it explains exactly why a man with $55,000 never once had a chance against a woman who had been dead for 16 months. It took a day and a half and a clerk named Rosalie who had known Eva and treated the request as a personal matter. Deed Book 41, page 212. Recorded the 11th of October, 1974. Eva Frances Odell, sole owner, had recorded a covenant running with the land. If the parcel were ever used for commercial lodging, retail fuel sales, or highway service beyond the operation of a single cafe of not more than 900 square feet, title would revert immediately and automatically to the village of Cordell, to be held for the benefit of the public, forever, regardless of who owned it, regardless of how many silver pickups came up the highway. The restriction could be released by one thing only, a majority vote of the 5-member village board. She had given away for nothing half a century before she died. The exact thing Garrett Voss had driven out here to buy. "But he's a developer," Marlene said, staring at the page. "Wouldn't his lawyers have found this in an afternoon?" Odessa smiled, and it was not a warm smile. "Child, he found it in the spring. A title search turns this up before lunch." She folded her hands on the clerk's table. "Which tells me precisely what he was doing on your step. He was never betting you'd sell him buildable land. He was betting you were broke and grieving and freshly divorced and would take $6,500 to make him go away. and once the deed was his, he'd walk into a village board meeting in a town of 211 people, with an empty school and no ambulance service, and he'd offer them jobs and a tax base and a check they could not say no to. And he'd have that covenant released in a room where nobody had a lawyer. She tapped the page. He was counting on two things: that the heir was ignorant, and that the town was too poor to be anything but grateful. Marlene sat back. He's already talked to them. Twice, Odessa said. Since April. The flat key fit a safe deposit box at Cordell State Bank, drilled open in the presence of a notary, and inside was the original recorded covenant and clipped to it a note in that uphill hand. For Marlene, when she's ready to read it, she'll already understand it. There was a second envelope under it. Thin, soft at the corners, her name on the front. She didn't open it there. She read it that night in booth 6 by the light coming through the window off the sign, alone, and what was in it, she never told a living soul, not even Emmett, except that when she was done, she folded it back along its own creases and tucked it inside the front cover of a new ledger she had already decided to start, where she could find it. Garrett Voss did not come back to the cafe. He went to work on the town instead. He put a full-page ad in the Sheridan County paper with a rendering of the travel center, 31 jobs, an estimated $400,000 a year in property tax, for a village that ran its whole budget on $91,000. He held a meeting at the Legion Hall with sandwiches. 2 board members came out for it publicly within a week. He found Emmett at the Cenex, put a hand on the boy's shoulder, and offered him a job. Good money, a real apartment in Alliance. All he had to do was tell the county the truth, which was that he'd been living in the building without a permit, and wasn't that a shame, and wouldn't a fire marshal be interested? Emmett walked home 11 miles rather than take a ride from him, and he told Marlene, and she made him a grilled cheese, and cut it into triangles without thinking about it, and had to go stand in the walk-in for a minute. The vote was set for the second Tuesday in December, in the Cordell Village Hall, which was one room with a linoleum floor, and 40 folding chairs and a coffee urn. 91 people came. In a town of 211, the 2 board members who had come out for the project spoke about the school and the ambulance, and about how the highway had been dying since Marlene's grandmother was a young woman. Voss spoke for 11 minutes, and he was good, and he was not wrong about a single number he cited. Then the chair asked if anyone from the public wished to be heard, and Marlene Odell stood up with a 5-pound coffee tin in her hands. She was shaking. She told them so. "I've been here 5 weeks," she said. "Most of you knew my grandmother better than I did, and I'll carry that the rest of my life." She set the tin on the table. "There are 340 meal tickets in here." She wrote every one of them out, and she never rang up a single one. "There are 61 years in that tin. There's a soybean farmer in 1978 who left a shotgun in her trunk. There's a woman in 1984 who was leaving her husband and had a little girl asleep in booth 6. Her voice went. She waited. "That little girl is standing in front of you." Nobody moved. 11 of the reasons written on these tickets belong to people in this room right now, Marlene said. "I know which 11. I have read every one of them, twice." Somebody in the back row put a hand over their face, and I am never going to say a word about which. She put her hand flat on the lid. She never did, not one time in 61 years to anyone about anybody. She'd have burned this box before she'd have used it to win an argument, and if I read these names out loud tonight to save my building, then whatever it is you all keep coming out to that highway for, it'd be gone, and I'd have handed it to him for free. She picked the tin back up and held it against her chest. "So I'm not going to make a case," Marlene said. "I'm just going to tell you what she wanted. She wanted a light on at the end of a road nobody uses anymore. 50 years ago she made it so nobody could ever put it out, including her, including me. That's all. Vote how you need to. There's coffee at my place after, and it's on the house, and it always was." She sat down. The chair called for a motion to release the covenant. Farrell Dunbar, 76 years old, 3 hamburger steaks and 4 milks in 6 weeks of 1997, sat with his hands on his knees for 11 full seconds. Then he said, "I move we adjourn." The motion carried 4-1. Garrett Voss stood at the back of the room, in a room full of people who would not look at him, and then he went out to his truck, and the sound of it faded east down the old highway, and Marlene Odell never saw the man again. Curtis called 8 days later. The Omaha paper had picked up a piece about it, and there was a photograph of the sign, and somebody had used the phrase local landmark. He was warm on the phone. He said he'd always known there was something special about that old place. He said he'd been thinking, and he wondered whether she'd want to grab dinner sometime and talk, and that he'd been having a hard year himself. Marlene stood behind the counter with a rag in her hand. "Sign's still on," she said. "Coffee's still hot." He started to say something. "But you're not hungry, Curtis," she said, and hung up and finished wiping down the counter, and it took her about 4 minutes to realize she felt nothing at all, and about 4 more to start laughing. If you have made it all the way here with her, you are exactly the kind of person these stories get made for. Subscribe, and stay with me for the last few minutes, because what Marlene did next is the whole point of everything that came before it. She reopened the Meadowlark on the 1st of March, Thursday through Sunday, 5 in the morning till 2 in the afternoon, because that was all one woman and one boy could do. Odessa Krause took the register on Saturdays and would not accept pay. Emmett ran the flat top and turned out to have hands for it, and by summer he was doing the ordering, and in the fall he started the welding program in Alliance on Mondays and Wednesdays and drove back every night because, he said, somebody had to sweep the lot. Marlene took shifts at the county clinic in Rushville 2 days a week to keep the propane filled. She learned the bird's transformer. She kept the case of peaches under the prep table where it had always been and never once opened it, and every night, when the last dish was in the rack and the door was locked and the highway went black in both directions, the sign stayed on. $60-some a month for a light on a closed diner, burning out into 40 miles of nothing. She started a 4th ledger. She didn't tell anybody. She just bought a cloth-bound book at the drugstore in Gordon, the closest thing she could find to the old ones, and tucked her grandmother's last letter inside the front cover and set it under the register beside the tin and waited. She didn't wait long. It was the 2nd week of April, past 2 in the morning, sleet coming sideways off the plains, when a set of headlights she didn't know crawled up out of the east and slowed and pulled into the gravel. She heard it from the cot. She'd been sleeping in the back hallway all spring because she liked it better than the apartment in Rushville, which was a thing she had stopped explaining to people. A young man got out of an old Corolla with a sleeping bag in the back seat. 22 maybe, thin jacket. He stood in the sleet and looked at the bird on the roof for a long moment, and then at the dark windows, and he put his hands in his pockets and turned back toward his car like a man who has just remembered that lights don't mean anything. Marlene opened the door. "Come in out of that," she said. He stopped. "It's closed. I saw the sign and I thought, I'm sorry, I can go." "It's sleeting and you're wet through," she said. "Grid'll take 6 minutes to come up. Sit anywhere." He didn't move. "Why?" he said. The same question Odessa had asked about the pie. The same question Marlene suspected 340 people had asked across 61 years, standing in that same doorway with rain or snow or the worst night of their lives on their shoulders. She held the door open wider. "My grandmother used to get asked that a lot," she said. "Come on in." She fed him. She didn't ask him one single question he didn't offer up on his own, and by the time the sleet quit around 5, he had told her about the job in Casper that hadn't been there when he arrived, and about his mother, and about how far $500 gets you, which is not as far as you'd think. He slept in booth 6. In the morning she filled his tank at the Cenex and put $40 in the pocket of that thin jacket and told him not to argue about it, and stood in the gravel and watched the Corolla go west until it was nothing. Then she came back inside and pulled the new ledger out from under the register and opened it to the first page and wrote, in a hand that leaned uphill because apparently that's a thing that runs in a family, the date and a name and a reason, and underneath it, the only line that mattered. Sign still on. Coffee's still hot. Told him he can come back. Emmett read it over her shoulder, which he would not have done a season earlier. "She'd have liked that you kept it the same," he said. "She'd have liked that you stayed," Marlene said. The boy went still the way he did, and then he nodded once and went out to scrape the griddle that didn't scrape itself. Maybe that's the part most of us have wrong. We spend our lives keeping score of the things that show up on a card. The house, the retirement account, the good truck, the square footage. And then we let the men who count that way tell us what we're worth too. And the terrible thing is how easily we believe them. But the things that actually hold a place together have never once appeared on an assessor's card. A woman fed strangers in the dark for 61 years and wrote each one down, not as a debt but as a life. She never asked to be paid. She never told anybody. And at the end of it, the quiet kindness she'd given away for free turned out to be the one thing on that whole 4/10 of an acre that no amount of money could move, because she had made it mean too much to too many people for money to get a grip on it. Garrett Voss had $55,000 and a folder of renderings, and he lost to a woman who'd been in the ground for a year and a half because he never understood the simplest thing about people, which is that the richest thing any of us will ever hold is a debt we chose not to call in. That was Iva Odell's real estate. Not the building the county valued at nothing. She left her granddaughter a light, and a long, quiet record of every soul who'd ever steered by it, and about the simplest instruction a human being can be handed, which is to keep it burning and not say much about it. A legacy isn't the thing you leave behind. It's the light you leave on, and whether the person who comes after you keeps paying the bill. So if there's some small kindness you've been putting off, some light you keep meaning to leave on for somebody, and you've been telling yourself it doesn't matter because nobody's out there, leave it on anyway. Leave it on for all the years nobody comes. You will almost never find out which night was the one that counted. And to the person driving up out of the dark toward it, it will count more than you will ever be told. Marlene Odell was 46 years old. She had a Ranger with 214,000 miles on it, 2 shifts a week at a county clinic, a boy in the back hallway who had finally started sleeping through the night, and 4/10 of an acre that could never be taken. She had a coffee tin with 340 tickets in it and counting, and a new ledger with 1 entry, and a neon bird on a tar roof throwing red and gold out over a highway that the world had quit using, and she had not. Some evenings, when the wind laid down, she'd carry a cup out to the gravel and stand there, and watch the light come up brighter as the dark came on. One made thing burning on the whole flat face of the plains, small and certain, for whoever needed it next. The road ran right up to her door, and the door was not locked. It never had been, and Marlene Odell, who had come out here with a banker's box and a plan to be gone by Sunday, stood under her grandmother's sign and understood finally that she was not at the end of anything. She was just getting the coffee on.